Make sure everything is all set up. Hi, let's see here. Are we set up? Okay, I think we are. All right, thank you for your patience with me as I mess around getting everything online. So hello and welcome to this week's live stream. This past week on love, happiness, and success, I discussed a topic that I think is really important to everybody in a relationship. And I know this because I've been getting lots of questions and comments from everybody. Especially related to a YouTube video I put out probably a few months back about this really common pain point of feeling like sexual intimacy is just gone in a relationship. And I had so many honestly, like really heartfelt messages from people who are just not even just frustrated, but I think feeling really hurt, really rejected, oftentimes really resentful, to be completely honest with you, because of this part of their relationship seems like it's just gone. And they can't reconnect with their partner. So I had the opportunity this past week on Love, Happiness, and Success to actually interview one of the co-authors who worked closely with Dr. Ruth Westheimer. So depending on how old you are, honestly, like generationally. So Dr. Ruth was, back in the day, like starting in the 80s, this celebrity sex therapist. She was this tiny little thing, like 4 feet tall from somewhere in Eastern Europe. And she had this great accent. And so she was really talking about, in a very open way that was unusual for the time, the things that people can do to improve this part of their life. And she had just fantastic energy. And before she passed away, I think it was earlier this year, she published one last book. And so I got to speak with one of her co-authors about this. And it turned into a really interesting conversation and a very practical conversation about different things that we can all do in order to maintain this part of our relationship. And so if you are interested, I will throw up the link right here. It's available on my website, or of course, if you're connected with me to subscribing to the podcast or following me on YouTube, you will already have access to this, so you can see it. But if you have missed it, you can check it out here on my site. And so anyway, as you know, these live streams, I'm using this as an opportunity just to come and visit and hang out and answer your questions about the topics that we're talking about every week on the podcast. And so I would love to hear from you. And again, I know that this is like a sensitive topic. And so if you would like to ask me a confidential question here in this live stream, that's like, maybe not a comment in social media if it's about a sensitive part of your life, totally understand. You can use this link that I've put together for you. It's available on my website, growingself.com/Dear Lisa. It'll pop up right over here on my screen, and I'll be able to answer your question in real time. And so if you have things that are going on in your intimate relationship that you would like to talk about, I'd be happy to share, some perspective and some guidance on this. So, first of all, there are two different categories of questions that I tend to get on this topic. One of which is, Dear Lisa, I don't feel the same way that I used to. I would like to be interested in intimacy, and I'm not. And my partner is maybe unhappy with me. I used to enjoy this part of my life, but I was just like totally fizzled. What do I do? And so who would be in that boat? Is anybody feeling brave enough to kind of raise their hands? And, is that part of your life experience? Or on the other side of this, the other question that I get a lot are people who will report, honestly, and these are the words that they use, feeling trapped in a sexless relationship where they just feel like so frozen out. Oh, me? Thank you. Okay, I can relate. Well, let's talk about that, okay? But also just like feel really frozen out by their partner. Like they want to be closer to their partner, but it feels like there's not only opportunities to connect or get close or get physical, but like they are feeling rejected on a lot of different levels. Like it transcends the physical. It really goes into feeling loved and cared for, They feel like they can't talk to their partner about this part of their lives, and that feels really hard. And they feel trapped. They feel like they can't change it, and so that is a bad place to be in. Can anybody relate to this? Has been in on that side of the coin, like wanting to have more intimacy, and your partner's like, no, thank you, and I don't want to talk about it either. Anyone? I'll give you a minute. Yeah. Oh, this is such a good comment. When I have here, let's just throw this up here for all to see. I love this comment, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. Hold on, let me move this over here so you can see. Yeah, toxic relationship. How can I be your lover when I feel like your mother? Oh my God, that's good, and it even rhymes. We need to cross-stitch that one on a pillow. I love it. So let's talk about you. I mean, I would love just to hear more about what your own pain points are. And I have had a couple of people write in prior to this live stream just to share, and comments and questions, what's going on with them. So we'll just jump into some of these too. Oh, that's a book. I have not read that book. How can I be your lover when I'm busy being your mother? All right, I'll have to check that one out. That sounds really good. Thank you for letting me know. I always learn so much from you guys on these things. Like, this is good. Okay. So let's just jump into some of your questions. And I want to hop into a couple of these really good ones that came in advance of this live stream, because I think that you'll be able to relate. Okay. So one, and this is just really straightforward, and I think a lot of people can relate, is why does it seem so easy for my husband to be in the mood, but so difficult for me? Help. And this is coming from someone with I always am cautious about making assumptions, but a female sounding name. So we can maybe assume the female identifying partner in this relationship, wondering why her experience with sexuality is so different than that of her male partners. And I think that there are a lot of different reasons for this. Men and women are wired differently when it comes to this sort of thing. I think men have oftentimes, but not always, men struggle with this too sometimes, but can have a physiological drive that is just more active or more proactive, that sets them up to be in a position to initiate these kinds of encounters. Whereas I think many women have a more receptive sexuality, so that they might not necessarily feel like being intimate unless it is activated. I think it's very common for many women to not really feel that aroused or whatnot until they start engaging in that. And that's what kind of when things turn on for them. And so, it can be challenging, especially if you're in a relationship where the male partner wants a female to initiate. So that can be a point of stress. But also, I think that a lot of times the default response of women is to really not actually feel like they're in the mood in the very beginning, like prior to those encounters. And so that can be confusing because, if their partner initiates an experience and they're like, I don't really feel like that right now, that maybe they won't engage. Whereas sometimes, and not always, nobody should be intimate with anybody if they do not feel like it or don't want to be. But if there is an expectation that you should have an immediate desire, like, oh yeah, let's do that, that's not actually the way that women work typically physiologically. And so sometimes having false beliefs about what should be happening can be a barrier. It is also true that female sexuality can be more, I don't want to say complicated, but nuanced. And so we have things like hormonal fluctuations that are very real, and particularly in some phases of life. If you've had a baby recently, you're still breastfeeding, like your hormonal soup is going to be different, and that can really impact the way that you feel. Additionally, coming into your 40s or beyond, perimenopause starts to change the equation, menopause, and so there can need to be sometimes some recalibration for how does my body work now in the context of different hormonal balances or inputs. It is also true that female sexuality can be very sensitive to things like stress, exhaustion, relational conflict. If a female partner, and I think this is true for a lot of people, but in my experience, often more with female partners, if they are feeling not good about parts of their relationship, they're feeling disconnected emotionally, they feel like their partner's kind of checked out or not being a equal co-creator of a shared life, like if they feel like a lot of the emotional or energetic burden of running the show is getting put on them, resentments are starting to build up, they feel like they can't talk to their partner, or that their partner isn't a good friend or being kind to them, or there's not unity, that will create a lot of issues that often manifest in sexuality, that it's very difficult, I think, for a female to want to be intimate with somebody that they don't like, they don't feel good about, they feel mistreated by, they feel resentful towards, or hostile towards, or they feel like there's hostility being directed at them. Whereas I think many times with male partners, there's a little bit more of a separation. And in fact, one of the pathways that many men have towards feeling closer is actually through sexuality, where many times women need to feel closer before they can move into sexuality. And so those are some big differences. But then lastly, at the end of the day, a lot of times, and in my experience in doing couples counseling, is that in a relationship where there are issues, particularly when things are feeling out of balance in terms of division of labor, or things are out of balance relationally or emotionally, women will often start taking on a lot of the burden of things, making sure everything's okay, doing the things, signing the forms, cleaning the stuff, like a lot falls on them. And there is a very real physiological, literal experience of exhaustion that comes along with that a lot of times. And, if somebody is falling into bed at 8 o'clock, exhausted, and has so much energy going out in the care of other people, feeling like there's not a lot of energy coming back in terms of self-care, or also being supported by other people in their lives. There's a very real depletion that is part of that. That often manifests in sexuality. That can be the canary in the coal mine, like, wow, I'm really running myself ragged. And so, interestingly, there are actually studies, correlations that show that men, and this is obviously heterosexual relationships, but men who take on more of the load, housework, childcare, and create a more equitable relationship, a more Scandinavian style, there is more sex being had in those relationships than ones where women are kind of feeling like everything is falling on them at the expense of their well-being. So anyway, that's something to think about. And so to answer your question, the original question was, why does it seem so easy for my husband to be in the mood, but so difficult for me? I would suspect that it is one of those domains that is maybe needing a little bit of course correction. So I don't know if you're here in the conversation with us, but if you are, I would love to hear more about whether any of the points that I mentioned resonate with you and your life experience. So anyway, let me know. Okay, such a good question. And so who can relate to any of the things that I was just talking about when it comes to sexuality, and why in heterosexual relationships, sometimes it seems like men have more energy for that than women do? Does any of this relate? I know we have a little bit of a time delay with what's happening on Instagram versus YouTube, but I'd love to hear about your stories and experiences if you'd be willing to share. No. Oh, somebody mentioned here. Let's pull this up on the screen. I love this. Let's see. Oops, here it is. That you can identify with that comment. Male may use sexual intimacy to connect, whereas female needs relationship to feel intimate, to want to be sexually intimate. Yeah, I think there is this sense of closeness or emotional safety that is really important. I think it's hard for women to fight through it when they're feeling really disconnected or honestly like angry, like I'm not getting my needs met in this relationship, either relationally or emotionally, or even just like feeling like you're a partner and now you want me to what? Like, that's a real experience. So anyway, so, okay. And then another comment, like only in relationships or in general. Tell me a little bit more, the question there. Only in relationships or in general? Okay, we'll wait and see if there's a follow-up to that. Okay, well, another question that came through my little anonymous form here, which you are absolutely welcome to use if you would like to share a question with me and not have your name or social contact information broadcast everywhere, is to come to my website, growingself.com, dear-Lisa. So if you've been in this situation where you feel like either your sex drive is totally in the gutter or your partner is like, no, thank you, and you're feeling really bad about that, let me know what's going on. I would love to know so we can talk about it today. Yeah. Oh, follow up from the previous comment. Somebody was like, with only in relationships or in general, and then saying maybe they're meaning like in marriage or committed, like versus being single. And somebody said, yes, like my own personal relationship to sex that I'm not actually actively dating. Yeah. I mean, I think that what this podcast was about, and although we could talk about it, the intention of the live stream is really how to handle that relational imbalance when one person wants to have a sexual relationship with someone who is not that into it, and figuring out how to navigate that. Although if you're a single person and you're like, yeah, I'm not interested in doing that right now, we could certainly talk about that too today if that is something that would be helpful to you. No, I'm open to whatever. So thank you for bringing it up. But another question that did come in that I want to address, I had somebody write in just to say, is happy sexual monogamy even realistic? Like, does this work? Because this person is saying, I feel like people lose interest over time and that it's not the same. And I think that there are two different ways of looking at this. I think that certainly in long-term relationships, sexuality can wax and wane for sure. And especially in correlation with different phases of life. If you're going through a very stressful life experience, or you're working a lot, or maybe you just had kids, or you have little kids and there's not a lot of free time together, we can get habituated into kind of just not being together in a way that starts to erode that sense of sexual connection. And I think too that the things that make new relationships, like early stage romantic relationships, are characterized by a high degree of sexual chemistry a lot of times. And that is based on novelty, like not knowing someone very well. Anxiety is a big part of that. Like there are many pieces, and also certainly like physical attraction can be that as well. And what we also know from research is that this kind of intense limerence phase of a relationship will only ever last about 3 or 4 years. Interestingly, there's some evidence to suggest that nature actually designed us this way because, ironically, maybe not ironically, it takes about 3 or 4 years for a couple to come together, get pregnant, have a baby, and then have that baby be, fairly functional, self-supporting 3 or 4-year-old. Like, the timeline correlates. And so nature designed couples to really like be very bonded in that way during that period for possibly evolutionarily adaptive reasons. And what we see in the data is that after that 3 or 4 year mark, if people get married somewhere in there, that's about the time that divorces are more likely to spike. It's actually around years 6 and 7. But, some of the thinking is that if there was that early stage like romantic interest or strong sexual chemistry, that when that naturally evolves and isn't as present, then people are left with just the relationship and what that is actually like. And sometimes in the cold light of day, there's not enough there to make either person want to continue. So what does happen though in healthy relationships is that after that first phase of more intense romantic sexual connection, that relationships will naturally evolve into something that is honestly deeper, more powerful, more enduring, and that is a secure attachment bond, which does not feel the same way. It is the opposite of the ingredients that we need for a lot of sexual chemistry, right? I mean, novelty, gone. The anxiety, a lot of times, gone. Hopefully some of that physical attraction, but if you've been with somebody hundreds of times, I mean, that could even start to change too. And so I think that there are a couple of different pieces of this. And I think one is an understanding, a reality-based understanding of how relationships evolve in natural and normal ways in order to feel comfortable about that. Because one thing that will always mess relationships up that I have seen a lot of is if people have unrealistic expectations about what relationships are supposed to be like. And so if your metric of judging the quality of a relationship in terms of also, like romance and sexual chemistry and what's happening in the bedroom, if you are judging your relationship by your experiences of what's happening in years like, 1 to 3 of a new relationship and you're 10 years in and it's confusing for you because you want it to be the way it was in the beginning, that is going to make you feel bad about your relationship. It's going to make you feel worried that something is really wrong. It's going to make you, show up at a marriage counselor like me's office saying, I love them, but I'm not in love with them. And so I don't know if this relationship is right for me. And what has been very sad for me as a marriage counselor is that this is often said by people who have lovely, perfectly fine relationships, and that there are things that couples can do to rebuild sexual intimacy, particularly if it's drifted off course too much. I mean, you need to maintain some of that connection. That's part of the whole picture. But, if you want it to be the way that it feels when, like right when you're falling in love with someone, and that's the yardstick by which you're comparing your relationship, the natural outcome of that is to, and I've seen this happen so many times, like almost start chasing the dragon. Like this is part of the reason why people have affairs, and monogamous relationships and just, cycle through every 2 to 5 years in a new relationship is because their expectation is that it feels like how it does in the beginning. Can anybody relate to that experience or feel in alignment with what I'm saying? The original question was, is happy sexual monogamy actually realistic? People seem like they lose interest over time, and that it's not that necessarily interest is lost, but it is that long-term relationships evolve in these very predictable ways, and that in long-term relationships, couples need to handle their sexual relationship differently because it really isn't the same as it was in the beginning. So let's see. Okay. Yeah, some people agree. So who else has a question about this, or something that I can address here while we're together in this live stream that would be helpful for you? If there's something going on in your intimate relationship that you'd like some feedback around, or maybe some perspective on, I'd be happy to speak to it. I know we have a delay, but while we're waiting here, there are also very evidence-based, well-documented things that couples can do when they've perhaps been together for a little while and have realized that they've drifted too far off course. And it starts by having a courageous conversation that is usually initiated by the person who wishes that they were more intimate, and with the understanding that the other person may not be in that same place. But a courageous conversation that says, I don't feel good about the way that this is going right now. I wish that we had more sexual intimacy in our relationship. And so the title of our live stream today is why you're not having sex, if you're just joining us, as I see some people are. But the way that the path of repair starts with a conversation. And one of the things that I've been so struck by in some of the comments or questions that have come in lately, particularly on my YouTube channel related to that sexless marriage video, is that people feel like they cannot talk to their partner about this. If they try to bring up the fact that they would like to have a different kind of sexual relationship, it feels like they just get completely shut down, that their partner is not only not interested in having sex with them, is not willing to even have a conversation where they can hear what it is like for their partner to be in a relationship with someone who has no interest in being sexually intimate. Can anybody relate to that? I'd be so interested to hear. No? Again, apologies for the delay here. I know that it can be hard. Well, at any rate, so, in this situation, people really feel like they're in a bind, right? Because you can't talk about it, you can't change it. And so what I've been sharing with people online, and I'll share the same advice to you, is that if you are in a relationship with anybody who is unable or unwilling to have a constructive conversation with you about things that you're perceiving in this relationship to be being really problematic, like, this doesn't feel like a sustainable way for me to spend the next 30 years of my life, kind of thing. If somebody's not willing to talk with you about that, you will need to get support to figure out what to do, because nobody gets to hold you hostage in a relationship that feels really bad for you, right? And so this is a situation where you might consider getting connected to a really good licensed marriage and family therapist, or ideally, a marriage and family therapist who has a background in sex therapy. That's its own discipline, is sex therapy. Because it may be necessary to have a competent third party work with both of you. Assuming that your partner will even go to that session with you. And if they don't or won't, there's another solution for this. But to have somebody who can really work with both of you to get to the bottom of what is going on, because there is always more to the story. Let's see. So in the hands of a really competent marriage and family therapist or sex therapist, what this process looks like is a fairly lengthy assessment process, that we don't just jump in and start talking about, okay, so here's what to do differently, date nights, whatever it is. There are multiple sessions spent doing a fairly deep dive into histories on both sides, Unfortunately, for too many people in this world, sexual trauma is a very real thing, as is really unhelpful messaging, often from early childhood, about sexuality, what it means to be a sexual person. I mean, like, think about it, especially for people identifying as female. There's a lot of socialization for girls and teenagers, young women, that like, you shouldn't do that, that bad girls, and like everything that means, and that it's something to be avoided. It's something that's shameful. And then let's flip that switch, and now you're a grown woman and you're married, and we want you to be really sexual now. Like, go ahead, have fun. It's like, that's not how people work. And so there can be a lot of internalized stuff that goes on that needs to be brought into the light. There can be certainly trauma, certainly messaging, but also, in my experience as a marriage counselor, often there are relational issues that are at the core of this, that are really getting in the way, and that haven't been successfully addressed in the relationship. And so those relationship problems are like the central engine, but like the symptom of the relationship problems maybe isn't screaming, yelling, and fighting, but it is this like total disconnect and lack of interest in sexuality. But it takes time to peel that onion, and especially if you're in a relationship with someone where the communication has been bad, resentments have been building up, there's a lot of negativity on one or both sides, it becomes almost impossible to have an emotionally safe conversation about something that is very, very vulnerable and very hard to talk about, even under the best circumstances. And so people kind of lock down and refuse to talk about sexuality at all, because the relationship isn't in the kind of place that is necessary to be able to have that kind of emotionally intimate connection. So by working with a good marriage and family therapist, ideally that has a background in sex therapy, we can begin to we don't jump into like, okay, let's start having sex, but it's again like understanding what the problem is. What are the obstacles that are getting in the way? And then piece by piece. And sometimes it's more than one piece. Sometimes there was early childhood sexual trauma, and also a lot of negative messaging around sexuality, and also relationship problems. So like, these things are multifaceted. And if you've been feeling stuck, like, I initiated sex and she keeps saying no, and I don't know why. Let's look into some of those pieces, because that's really where the answer is. And if you don't have visibility into that, we can't fix it. So there are professionals like, this is what we do. This is why we're here. So let's see. Let's actually address this really interesting comment that came through. Oops. Let's see here. I'm going to turn this off. Okay. And turn this one on. So the comment here, I don't understand why the butterflies went away. And it was one of those people who thought it meant I loved my partner, but I wasn't in love with him. Sadly, it led to affairs by both of us. I am sorry that you had this experience, and but thank you very much for sharing your story with our community here, because I think it's important for people to know that you can relate to that experience of being in an early stage romantic relationship where there were butterflies and all the chemistry, and then it evolved as relationships do. And because you didn't have another way of understanding what was happening, it led you to believe that something was wrong, and it led you to seek that feeling elsewhere with someone, which of course, and just speaking to the affair experience, with affairs, they are even more sexually charged because they have another element. Like, even if you just started dating somebody, so yes, you'll have novelty, you'll have the anxiety, you'll have the, that chemistry piece. But in the context of an affair, there's also this like secret, illicit, like component built into it that intensifies the anxiety, and it intensifies oftentimes the eroticism, because there's this like, oh, we're doing something wrong kind of piece, which has that sort of erotic component in some ways. And so that's why many times people will experience another person in the context of an affair situation, like an affair partner, as something that is very different from even an early stage dating relationship, because of the contextual circumstances. And so people can get very hooked on affair partners, and that's part of the reason why. But I will assure you is that if you met that exact same affair partner when you were single through a dating app and began seeing them, you might enter into an early stage romantic relationship where you did have the butterflies and the chemistry, and 6 years later that relationship will also feel a lot like your old one did. I talked about this experience a lot in my book, Exaholics, Breaking Your Addiction to an Ex-Love. And I also talked about this extensively on a podcast that I did a while ago. You know, I should actually revisit this topic, called Married with a Crush, that talks about the experience of being attracted to somebody who isn't your partner, and really the like on-ramp for these kinds of affair situations. So I'm really glad that you brought this up. I wish that more people knew about this, because I think it would save a lot of people from a lot of heartbreak. But anyway, I hope that things have stabilized with you now, and that it feels easier to be in a long-term relationship. And thank you for being here. Okay. And then another comment that came through that somebody else, I can totally relate to this right now. It's really affecting my mental health. Thank you for sharing that. And yet another person writes in, appreciate you highlighting the importance of this topic, especially in the context of long-term relationships where life, kids, work, family obligations impact intimacy, and having to relearn healthy sexuality in your 40s. Yeah, for sure. I think for a lot of people, and I mean, I can certainly relate to this in my own life, like everything else comes first. If your kids need something, you're there. Something needs to be done. A friend calls, your work obligations. I mean, everything. And we get pushed to the bottom of the list in terms of self-care, rest, not just like basic things, but I mean, much less, what do I enjoy? What brings me pleasure? Like, let me think about my own sexuality for a second. Like, there's no space in a lot of lives for that kind of thing, unless you decide to make space for it, and to decide for yourself, it's like, you know what? I miss this part of my life experience, of my personality, of myself. I need to reclaim this. Where do I even start? And that takes intention, and it also takes time and energy. And if you have everything in the universe piling up on you, like, it's, I think, not a reasonable, oops, my thing fell out, not a reasonable expectation that you should be able to be so superhuman that you're giving all this energy away, and then should also be like fully in contact with your like best sexual self. Like, oh my gosh. So anyway, I just wanted to validate that for everyone. And also pay attention to hormones. I mean, you know, for me, especially like going into 40s, that kind of thing, things change, right? And talk to your doctor about whether or not hormones may be impacting the way that you feel, and whether or not there's anything that you can do. Because I think especially in the last few years, many doctors, I think especially doctors, well, for a long time, you know, my understanding is that there was a lot of messaging in the zeitgeist among medical professionals that messing around with hormones would make it more likely that women would get breast cancer. And I think that research has been looked at more closely. The risk was found to be quite low, particularly compared to the benefits for having this kind of support. And so many doctors are getting on this train and more receptive to doing something to help you with that. So anyway, okay. So thank you so much for your comments and sharing. And I know that we're starting to come up on our time here. Does anybody else have questions or things that they would like to talk about? I'm just gonna check in my anonymous little question thing over here. So an interesting comment came through. Somebody who would like to know more about the bristle response. And I don't know if you're familiar with this topic or not, but so the bristle response, what it refers to is a almost like automatic, like recoiling reaction. Oftentimes in a heterosexual relationship, it is women that have this tendency, and where this can come from a couple of things, but there can be a dynamic in relationships that I've actually seen a bunch of times as a marriage counselor where the male partner, as the kind of activator of sexuality, the initiator, and somebody who is perhaps eager to engage in that way, will approach their partner, with like a hug or a kiss or some kind of touching, but their intention is to turn that into a sexual encounter or like an on-ramp to a sexual encounter. And their partner is tired, hungry, exhausted, stressed out, has 900 things on their mind, is worried about all the stuff that they have to do to the next day and like with the kids and like stuff, and is just like not in a place where they have anything to give in that moment, and it is not the right time for them to turn on that sexual part of themselves. And so and what will happen is that they then are like, no, kind of like trying to get away a little bit. And a couple of things, the male partner will often feel hurt, rejected, discouraged. It turns into narratives around, she doesn't like me, she doesn't love me, she doesn't want me. We never are intimate anymore. It can start to turn into like this weird resentful narrative a lot of times in men, unfortunately. But also, what it turns into is that the female partner will then begin equating being touched by their male partner with pressure to be sexually intimate, because there isn't a lot of other physical intimacy outside of that. So the automatic response is like trying to avoid being touched or recoiling from a partner, or being like, because they anticipate it turning into a negative experience where they feel pressured to have sex. My partner's going to get mad at me. I don't want to do this right now, but and it starts to feel creepy and yucky and bad. And so that's a lot of times where this recoiling response comes in. And this can feel really bad and confusing for both people in a relationship, because that is not a good place for anybody. I think we can all agree. And so I think that what is important, and can anybody relate? Have you experienced this? It's very common. I've talked to couples about this kind of thing all the time. And it's like it turns into this negative cycle where the only time touching happens is like a initiation for sex, and it turns into like this pursue, withdraw kind of avoidance pattern. Is anybody? Yeah. Okay. Somebody's saying, yeah, I'm exactly like this. Tell me more. If you feel like it, I don't want to pressure you into oversharing in a semi-public forum. Yeah, much pressure, and like you're letting him down totally. That's really, really common. And I wonder if you might have the opportunity to broach a conversation about this. Like, I feel like we've gotten into this pattern where the only time you want to hold my hand or give me a kiss or give me a hug is when you want to be intimate with me. And it makes me feel like I can't be physically close to you, because if I do, it's going to turn into a situation where you expect me to have sex with you, and I might not always want to do that. So where do we go from here? Like, right? Yeah, here, let me post, if it's okay with you, I will post this. And you're saying, oops, yeah, that you want to say, read the room, I'm not in the mood. And then his feelings are hurt, and I feel guilty and bad for not meeting his needs. Yeah, I mean, like, that is the experience. And so the path of growth here is a couple of things. First of all, particularly if you have that like automatic bristle response, like don't touch me when he gets close to you, what is going to be really, really important is to like reset your the expectations. Oh, okay. I don't want to overcomplicate this, but like being very intentional about engaging in a lot of non-sexual touching, like 10 times a day. I want you to hug me, or, touch me, or rub my back, or try to hold my hand and tell me I look great or smell good or whatever the thing is. And I want you to know that is not going to turn into an encounter. It is like retraining both of us that we can touch each other and have physical affection in our relationship without it necessarily needing to be sexuality, is one really important piece of this. So cuddling, back massages, whatever it is, but it's like, how do we start to make touch feel safe again, right? And something that I am receptive to and I appreciate and I like, as opposed to this like, I need to get away from this guy kind of reaction. So that is really important. And then the other piece of this would be doing a deeper dive into, part one, helping him read the room. How would he know if it was a good time, right? Because that might legitimately be unclear. And just in defense of either male partners or the people that are initiating sexuality, because, and I know we've been talking a lot about this by like gender role kind of breakdowns, and that is not always true. There are plenty of relationships where, a female partner might have a higher sex drive than her male partner, or same-sex relationships. I mean, these dynamics happen across the board. But so how would the person with the higher sex drive, with more interest, know when it would be a good time for them to approach you and you might be receptive to it? Because if they have zero information, they have to guess, or like, flip a coin or whatever it is. The only recourse they have is to just try, and then, usually get rejected 9 times out of 10. And so it's important to have conversations like this. And I'll just share, a lot of people don't like hearing this because, again, it goes against our narrative and our expectations of what good sexual relationships are supposed to be like, characterized by a lot of passion and chemistry and being swept away. I mean, like, that's what happens when we first meet people in early stage relationships, and see in the movies and all the things. And in longer term relationships, that tends to not work. Because if people want it to be spontaneous and swept away by passion, like that is not a realistic expectation for a more mature, long-term relationship where people are busy, where they're tired, where they have a lot of stuff going on. What does tend to work is making plans. What are you doing on Saturday? Do you want to hang out? Like, if you go on a date with somebody, like making it that intentional. And then to have that, okay, we're going to get a sitter, or I'm going to, like maybe not work, or I'm going to come home from work early, or maybe we'll go do something nice together, or, like have a more relaxing day where I have some energy. But that setting that intention, it really helps people anticipate that, be in the mood for it, and be receptive to it. Now, of course, I mean, things might always change. You might get to Saturday and get some weird kind of curveball, but making plans with each other and just having open conversations around that really, really helps. And also, it begins to have a corrective emotional experience. Like if you are with somebody who is used to getting rejected by you, they probably have a lot of anxiety, maybe building resentment. And so if you make plans, if you follow through with those plans, it turns into this, oh, you know what? We could probably be together a lot more than I've been thinking. I just need to like make plans, right? So I think that can be a really nice way of beginning to correct this. But I'd be really interested to hear more about your situation, if there are any other factors of this that I could speak to. But otherwise, I think we're just about at the end of our time here today. Oh, wait, here's one more. Okay, let's talk about this piece. There's a lack of affection like that in my relationship. And then it brings the question of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. The chicken comes first. Non-sexual physical affection comes before sexuality. And you can tell your partner I said that. So if your partner is in a place where now like they're withholding affection because you're not being intimate with them, like that's not going to work. And so make it the goal, like the first goal. Let's enjoy just touching each other again, being close to each other again, maybe being emotionally close again, and helping your partner understand that this is the path to repairing the relationship that will help them get what they want, and enroll them. If they are unable or unwilling to do this with you, again, that would be a moment to take this in front of a good marriage counselor, sex therapist, so that it would help everybody get in alignment around how this stuff works. So, yeah, I hope that that's helpful. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that that was helpful. Okay, you guys. Oh, wait, one last thing that I did want to share before we end. What I've been hearing from a lot of people in comments and questions coming in is related to just like feeling trapped in a relationship where there's no sexuality, their partner will not talk to them about changing this, and their partner also refuses to do any kind of growth work around this. So it feels like their partner would not be receptive to going and talking to a marriage counselor or sex therapist, and they're just like stuck. They're like, so I'm trapped in this. What do I do? And, you know, unfortunately, I think some people are trying to deal with that problem by like shutting down or, you know, anyway. But there is a different type of counseling/coaching that is called discernment counseling or coaching. I should share the link with you guys on my site. Let me see if I can put this in the comments if you want to learn more about this. But it is not for the purpose of improving a relationship. It is for the purpose of determining whether or not a relationship can be improved. So the goal of discernment counseling is to identify what is the problem, what would be required for both people to fix said problem, and is there enough motivation and commitment on both people's sides to do the work required to make this better. And sometimes, I would say most of the time, with that kind of clarity and leadership and understanding maybe of what the problems are in a different way, a lot of times people are like, yeah, let's both work together and do what we can to improve the situation and really like give it a solid effort for the next few months, right? And sometimes the outcome of those conversations can be, yeah, okay, now we have a better idea what the problems are, but I am actually not willing to change anything on my side in service of improving this relationship. So no. And even though that can be really hard to hear, what a gift that kind of clarity is when one person is like, yeah, I'm not motivated to do that with you, because then it turns into, okay, well, what next? So choices are, we stay in the situation and just kind of like, freeze in place for the next however many years, which is, I will just say this out loud, a perfectly fine choice if you have reasons for wanting to just maintain that stability for a period of time. Great. It's okay. You don't have to do anything. But you might also say, okay, now that I know that no change is possible, what does this mean for me? And how does this factor into my choices about what I want to do with the rest of my life and what kind of relationship I want to be in? And it can sometimes help people maybe even close the door emotionally and feel good about making a change. So I just wanted to bring that up as an option. If you're feeling really trapped in a situation with somebody who won't do the work with you, bring it into discernment coaching, just to make sure that you're both understanding the situation and just to see if any hope or change is possible. And if there isn't, then it's good information to have, right? Okay. Oh, okay. One last thing. We're going to talk about this super quick and then we'll wrap up. Somebody shared, my therapist actually recommended increasing non-sexual intimacy and contact, but I can't think of many other things besides cuddling, massage, any other suggestions. No, that's great. I mean, like, it's not about what you do. I think it's really like the frequency and whether or not it feels pleasant. So like if you're sitting on the couch next to each other watching TV, the arm goes around, or like leaning in, that totally counts. And it doesn't need to be anything more than that. I guess, the question would be, what kind of physical affection do you like the most? I like hugs. I really do. You know what? I am always down for a hug, and that feels great for me. So I like it when my husband wants to give me a hug. So that's, yeah, what is it for you? And don't worry about it being all kinds of different kinds. It's like, what feels good for me? What makes me feel close and connected? What feels safe for me? And also maybe asking them, right? I mean, this is a relationship. It's a two-way street. What kind of physical affection outside of sexual intimacy makes you feel most loved and connected to me? And then sharing that with them. That would be my advice. So I hope that you consider trying that. All right, you guys, thank you so much, as always, for spending this time with me today. I love doing this with you. Thanks for being here. And next week on the podcast, we are talking about how to deal with rejection of any kind, how to deal with rejection with friends, with family members, romantic rejection, certainly, but also professional rejection, like if you got fired or didn't get a job, something like that. So if you have been dealing with rejection in your life, listen to the podcast on Monday. It's going to be a good one. And then let's come back here on Thursday and we will discuss. All right, you guys. Thank you. Bye.